Thank you.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today to find out about the nutritive values of food production methods in the series on nutrition and food for ILR. Today we have two speakers who will give a joint presentation, and I'll just give you a little introduction to them right now. Joyce DiBenedetto Colton is a retired nationally certified health education specialist. She focuses on the connection between environment and dietary health. She received a master's degree in higher education from Florida International University and graduate certificates in environmental studies, as well as health promotion and disease prevention through the Florida International University's Stemple School of Public Health. Joyce has served 39 years in education at Miami-Dade College and at Florida International University. She will be our main speaker and will lead off the talk today. And then joining her will be Cynthia Cowen. Cynthia is a licensed message therapist and a longtime advocate for plant-based whole food nutrition. In 2014, she completed the Food for Life Nutrition and Cooking program offered through Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. In the 90s, she served as coordination of the Vegetarian Studies program at Miami-Dade College's Environmental Center. She has also sat on the Nutrition Advisory Council for Miami-Dade County Public Schools. She has served as director of the Miami chapter of Earth Save and has run its Healthy School Lunch program. So we are fortunate to have our two speakers, Joyce and Cynthia, join us today to speak about the nutritive values of food production methods. Joyce?
Hi, good afternoon, and thank you all for coming, and thank you, Pushpa, for inviting us. So you've come today to, because you have an interest in food and nutrition, I'm assuming, and some of you may already know a good deal about what you're eating. So today I'm going to talk about what your food ate. But first, I'll tell you a bit about my own food journey. From an early age, I was fortunate enough to help in my grandparents' home garden. They were Italian immigrants, and they came from a place in Eastern Italy where growing food was commonplace. You had to grow your own food. I loved helping with harvesting bushels of vegetables along with my cousins and watching how efficiently my grandmother and my aunts preserved the harvest by canning and freezing. Of course, there were plentiful and delicious meals of fresh vegetables as well. Little did I know I was beginning a life journey of understanding food systems. That was in the 1950s, post-World War II, about the time synthetic agrochemicals such as DDT were introduced as what was referred to as the Green Revolution in agriculture. Fast forward to the 1990s, when genetic engineering made it possible to insert BT, a bacterial cryotoxin, directly into plants, or to engineer plants to tolerate the herbicide glyphosate. This is to say that our food production systems have evolved dramatically, and these changes really need to be factored into our assessment of nutritive values of foods. And we hope to shed some light on this, that you can better assess the nutritional value between foods that are available. So these are the objectives for this session. After this presentation, we'd like you to be able to identify ways that food and nutrition affect personal and planetary health, ways that current food production methods affect the nutritional value of foods, how plant-based whole foods support the health of your gut microbiome and your immune system, the benefits of organically grown methods of food production, and the basic USDA organic standards, possible effects of agricultural inputs such as glyphosate on one's microbiome, which conventional crops have tested as safe, And we hope this empowers you to select foods that can maximize nutritional benefits and minimize health risks. So I'd like to begin with a broad picture to frame the view that all life on the planet is interconnected. Nutrition's not an isolated field of study or a branch of learning. Rather, it's what gives life to and determines the health of all biological organisms. And so nutritive value is greatly determined by one's environment or ecosystem. The term ecosystem was introduced in the late 1800s and frames ecological systems as communities. The term comes from the Greek word ekos, coined in German as Ökologie, meaning home or household or the environment in which one lives, in community. Ecology is about the relationships between living organisms and their physical environment. So actually we have both external and internal ecosystems. Health sciences have finally come to recognize that we are literally walking ecosystems, and each ecosystem is typically made up of diverse communities. Our bodies are made up of an array of microorganisms, including bacteria, fungi, protozoa, and viruses, and this is our internal ecosystem. We're about 90% microorganisms, consisting of about 40,000 bacterial strains and 100 trillion cells. So we're only about 10% animal cells. With few exceptions, healthy ecosystems rely on diversity, and that's true of our microbiome. Diversity of microbes helps maintain a healthy balance in our bodies and prevents overgrowth of any one bacterial strain. Our microbiomes have been described as the entire gene pool found in our bodies, and our genome, that entire gene pool, includes genetic material that comes from every bug in our gut. Our gut is considered our second brain, but really it's an extension of our brain via messaging along the vagus nerve. Microbes not only help you digest food and protect against infection, they also inform your brain about each organ in your body. So because microbes feed on fiber, and the only dietary source of fiber is plants, eating a variety of plant foods can help support a healthy diversity of microbes. And this is how our external environment is connected to and affects our internal environment. So we need to think about foods as nourishment for our gut microbes and making the healthiest choices for them. And we need to consider how the food and nutrients we feed our internal environment have been affected by the external environment. When we eat, we typically think that we're simply feeding ourselves or our appetites, but it turns out it's important to be conscious that we're feeding our microbiome and that there are numerous contributing factors or externalities connected to the not so simple task of nourishing ourselves. If we can shift the way we think about food and nutrition, we can better navigate our current food systems and be better able to discern which are the best available choices to benefit our internal as well as our external ecosystem. It's gotten complicated to navigate today's food systems and to make informed choices about foods, much less nutrition. So what's all the hype about organic, and what's that all about? Do genetically altered foods really pose risks? Are there foods that should be avoided? Which foods are the most beneficial, and which healthy dietary choices are you most likely going to adopt? It's up to you. It's not unusual that so many people are not quite sure what organically grown food means. In scientific terms, organic simply means carbon-based, and all living things are carbon-based. Carbon's the backbone to every known biological molecule. So all life forms on Earth are based on carbon. But here's where it gets confusing. Synthetic chemicals, which do not occur naturally, can be classified as organic, as in pesticides like chlorinated hydrocarbons or even synthesized vitamins. That's because synthetic chemicals are all derived from naturally occurring carbon-based compounds. However, synthetic chemicals are not naturally occurring. They've been broken down and reassembled in a laboratory. The result of breaking bonds is that functional cofactors are lost. Synthetic means man-made. Organic means from living matter. So synthetic is not viewed as organic, particularly in agricultural growing methods. So when we're referring to crops, organically grown means that the farmer uses only naturally occurring inputs and methods, and that crop production adheres to the USDA's National Organic Program standards. While organic standards have a long history from Demeter's biodynamic methods of the 1920s to Rodale in the 70s, it was the Organic Food Production Act of 1990 that required the USDA to develop national standards for the growing, processing, and certification of organic products. 10 years later, in 2000, the USDA's National Organic Program was published. The standards are regulated by each state, which must adhere to the minimum national standards for certifying growers. Very basically, the standards are that no restricted synthetic chemicals are allowed, no genetically modified organisms or GMOs are allowed, no sewage sludge is allowed as fertilizer, and no irradiation is allowed. While these standards have remained in place since 2000, there have been continuous challenges. For example, allowing hydroponics to be certified as organic, and the push to recognize CRISPR and other RNAi technologies as not GMO, which could allow RNAi products to be labeled as certified organic. So I want to briefly address why each of these items are important to consumers. First, the use of synthetic pesticides on food crops interferes with the body's endocrine system or hormones, neurological system, neurotransmitters, and immune system functions in general. Since all pesticides are biocides, synthetic pesticides wreak havoc throughout the body and in all biological systems by disrupting microbial cell-to-cell communication. Secondly, there's been ongoing controversy over whether or not GMOs can pose health risks, and that subject is for a different presentation. The point here is that GMOs are not allowed under the organic label. However, it's important to note that recent developments in biotechnology have introduced newer forms of gene splicing, such as CRISPR, TALEN, RNAi technology. CRISPR stands for clustered, regularly interspaced, short palindromic repeats, which means zilch here. Basically, it's a type of RNAi technology which interferes with gene expression. That's what the I represents. While GMO technology cuts and pastes genetic material from one species to another, such as in the flavor saver tomato, I don't know if you remember that, where they spliced cold water genes into a tomato to extend the growing period into colder months, and as well as the Starlink corn, where BT was spliced into the corn so that it wouldn't get munched on or it would kill a larva that was feeding on it. In comparison, CRISPR technology cuts and pastes genetic material within the same species. So based on that, CRISPR argues that it is not genetic modification and therefore is seeking to be approved for organic certification and labeling. RNAi can only be used for gene silencing. For example, turning off the genes that allow oxidizing, which prevents potatoes and apples from browning. While CRISPR technology can use the gene knockdown, which reduces gene expression, or knockout, which totally silences the gene expression. Concerns have been raised regarding potential off-target effects where CRISPR cuts the DNA at an unintended place during gene editing. A cut in a wrong location of the genome can result in a mutation with problematic effects. Studies most often mention that Cas9, an enzyme that CRISPR uses to cleave DNA at a specific location, could also make cuts where it's not intended, causing possible toxin issues. Thirdly, Sewage sludge is collected from treatment plants, dried and utilized as fertilizer. Processed sludge is sometimes referred to as compost, which is misleading. Sludge should not be used on food crops, not simply because of the sewage, but because of all the household chemicals and pharmaceuticals that go down drains, which contaminate soils in which crops are grown. That's what our plants are eating. Fourthly, irradiation is used to rid foods of potentially harmful microbes, molds, and fungi. Ionizing radiation sends enough energy into the bacterial or mold cells in the food to break chemical bonds so that bacteria die or no longer multiply. At the same time, beneficial microbes in the food are damaged, diminishing the nutritive value of fresh produce. Here we see berries that are about 2 months old. The ones on the left are irradiated and look deceptively fresh, while the ones on the right are decomposing. Irradiated foods are not easily identifiable at the market, but when you see this label on the food packaging, the food has been exposed to an irradiation process. All of these food production practices affect the quality and nutritional value of foods. When you see the organic label, although it's not perfect, it indicates the best available commercial agricultural products with no or low levels of synthetic chemicals, pesticides, and fertilizers. Products sold, labeled, or represented as organic must have at least 95% certified organic content. Products labeled as made with organic must have at least 70% certified organic content, but the USDA organic seal cannot be used on these products. And then products containing less than 70% organic content can identify specific ingredients as organic on their ingredients list, but the product also cannot bear the certified label. Produce can be labeled organic if it's certified to have been grown in soil that has had no prohibited substances applied for 3 years prior to harvest. A side note is that recently, just in September of 2022, courts upheld a ruling that hydroponically grown produce can be certified and labeled as organic. For farmers who support the Real Organic Project and who maintain the original USDA standard of grown in organic soil, the ruling is viewed as an unfortunate weakening of the standards. So, are nutrients in foods different? The answer is yes. Nutrients vary across both organically and conventionally grown foods. And while some early studies concluded there's no significant difference in the amount of nutrients in fruits and vegetables between growing methods, recent studies have confirmed that statistically higher levels of antioxidants were consistently found in organically grown foods as compared to conventional produce, up to 69% higher in organics, including certain micronutrients such as vitamin C, up to 52%, as well as higher levels of zinc and iron and other minerals. However, all fruits and vegetables provide nutritional, valuable nutrients and fiber and support health. Fruits and vegetables provide nutritional value however they're grown. So why look to organic foods, especially if they often cost more? There are a few reasons. First, regarding methods of food production, the nutritive value of foods is offset by the inputs that are used in conventional agricultural methods, particularly offset by both synthetic pesticides and fertilizers required for industrial monocropping, as well as genetic modification. Here are two comparisons of technology in food production. One of these red apples is a conventionally grown fruit, and the other is certified organic. Any difference? If you took a bite out of each one, you wouldn't be able to tell which was which. Fruit will naturally vary from tree to tree based on its genes and environment. The only way to tell the nutritive values between them is to test the fruit for nutrients and pesticides. On the other hand, when these green apples were sliced open and were exposed to air, it was clear that the conventionally grown apple oxidized and turned brown, which one you would expect. However, the RNAi apple, known as an Arctic apple, is genetically engineered to remain white since its response to oxygen has been turned off. The same RNA interference technology prevents potatoes from browning, patented as innate potatoes. It's only been in the last 60 years that industrialized agriculture has shifted from traditional to conventional farming that uses intense applications of synthetic chemical inputs onto food crops, and more recently, GMOs. The movement known as the Green Revolution that was implemented in the US from 1967 to 1978 was considered a great success and changed the country's status from a food deficient economy to one of the world's leading agricultural nations. In the US, for the most part, foods have been made more available and convenient through harvesting, processing, and packaging before they make it to markets and food banks. And since we mostly see just the end products, it's not so surprising that many people aren't aware of the systems that produced that food. So here's a little history about agricultural food production and ways it's affected nutritional quality. So about 12,000, maybe give or take a few thousand years, about 12,000 years ago, humans invented agriculture practices that allowed them to transition from hunting and gathering to settling in communities and planting seeds for edible crops. Prior to that, humans, like all other ant species, would need to go where the food was. Now the food could be where they were. Fast forward to the 20th century, and prior to World War II, food was predominantly grown on family farms. And despite the effects of the over-tilling and overgrazing that greatly contributed to the Dust Bowl era of the 1920s, to some extent, we've retained the image of food coming from picturesque, bucolic family farms. And some of you may remember the popular victory gardens of World War II. Still farming methods prior to 1940 were soil-based and relied on sun, water, and soil, which included composting and natural amendments. That's how plants were able to convert inorganic minerals into absorbable organic nutrients to nourish all animal species on Earth. Then, during World War II, certain synthetic chemicals such as DDT were developed for various purposes, which were subsequently introduced into agricultural practice as a means of controlling pests, whether insects, rodents, or fungus. And soon these chemicals were promoted to university agriculture programs as a means of increasing crop production. The Green Revolution promoted the use of synthetic pesticides and fertilizers that allowed large-scale monocropping on industrial farms aimed at high yields. While yields were in fact booming, consumers were unaware of the latent health risks of these newly developed synthetic chemicals. According to the US Geological Survey, each year, 1 billion pounds of pesticides are applied to US agricultural crops, 6 billion pounds worldwide. As you can imagine, after 60 years, agricultural chemicals, including potent synthetic fertilizers, have taken their toll on our water, soil, and air. Groundwater and runoff into rivers and oceans cause algal blooms and fish die-offs. Pesticides and fertilizers emit greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. According to the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, food systems account for more than 1/3 of global greenhouse gas emissions, more than all car and truck emissions worldwide. Pesticides affect the soil by depleting beneficial microbes that help plants thrive. The trade-off in conventional farming practices intended to increase yields has come at a cost of compromising the health of the environment, as well as the nutritional value of the food. And we continue to develop new food production methods through genetic engineering. There's a backstory to GMOs, and that's tied to the infamous chemical glyphosate, also known by the industry brand Roundup. I'll explain that connection in a few minutes, but first I want to identify the most prevalent genetically modified crops we see today. In the 1990s, the first wave of GMO produce became available to consumers, the first crops being Roundup Ready soy and corn, meaning the crop was engineered to tolerate the herbicide glyphosate. or Roundup. Currently, over 90% of soybean, corn, and cotton acreage in the United States is planted with genetically engineered seeds. But about 80 to 90% of those crops aren't consumed by humans, they're fed to livestock. Most GE crops in our food supply include soybeans and corn, in addition to sugar beets for sweetener, canola and cotton seeds for oil, as well as potatoes, tomatoes, summer squash, papaya, and apples. Before I address some concerns and possible health risks of GMOs, I want to make a couple of additional points about even more recent developments in food production technology. The latest focus in plant-based food production has increasingly shifted to high-tech hydroponic systems. Burgeoning large indoor warehouse spaces have emerged which use synthetic carbon-based liquid fertilizers that circulate over the roots of plants. Many of these operations supply lettuce, tomatoes, and other vegetables to large grocery chains. And the increasing amount of it is now able to be labeled as organic after courts ruled to allow that last September. Under the original national organic standards, organically grown specified that plants must be grown in soil. However, the standards now allow large hydroponic operations. Many certified organic growers have signed on to the Real Organic Project in an effort to maintain the original standards. Those who are certified and adhere to the soil standard can utilize the Real Organic Project seal. Farmers committed to organic methods use systems that grow in soil, incorporate organic compost, and are free of restricted chemicals, and use methods such as polyculture, in which a diversity of crops commingle to help build a healthy environment in which plants and microbes can thrive. Basically, a healthy ecosystem or a microbiome. Multiple studies have shown that organically grown varieties do provide significantly higher levels of vitamins and minerals than organic varieties of the same foods. While being higher in these nutrients, they are also significantly lower in pesticide residues and nitrates. With few exceptions, organic foods typically provide greater levels of numerous important antioxidant phytochemicals, cofactors such as anthocyanins, flavonoids, and carotenoids that assist in biochemical relationships. Also, in vitro studies have demonstrated that organic foods are more potent suppressors of mutagenic actions of toxic compounds. They clean them out and inhibit the proliferation of certain cancer cell lines. So now we can get back to the story about the connection between GMOs and glyphosate. Once upon a time, a chemical named glyphosate was invented to dissolve mineral buildup and scaling problems in commercial pipes and boilers, and it was patented for that purpose in 1964 as a descaling agent in which the chemical would bind to and then remove mineral buildup in these boilers. Listed at the bottom are some of the minerals that this broad spectrum chemical binds to, like sulfur, iron, copper, zinc, calcium, magnesium, cobalt, manganese, or selenium. After the boilers had been descaled, the system would need to be flushed out, and if flushed into a field, it was quickly noticed that the chemical killed all the plants. That was when Monsanto bought the molecule and repatented it as an herbicide in 1969. So the descaling agent that was designed to bind to metal ions or minerals removed them from solution, making them non-reactive and bio-unavailable, is why plants died after contact. Because all life processes depend on metalloproteins to function. If minerals aren't available to plants, they die. Long story short, Monsanto engineered soy and corn plants to tolerate glyphosate and patented the crops and commercialized them as Roundup Ready crops in 1974. This solved the problem of weeds for growers and made harvesting easier because they could spray their fields, kill the weeds, but not their crops. GMO soy and corn crops have been grown since then, mostly for animal feed, as mentioned. After Monsanto was unsuccessful in marketing their Roundup-ready wheat to European countries in 2004 due to public outcry there, they shelved it and began promoting Roundup to U.S. farmers as a crop desiccant to be used to dry conventional grain and pulse crops just prior to harvest. So now, even if crops are not genetically modified, they can be sprayed with glyphosate so the plants can quickly dry out, making harvesting with large combines much easier. Dried grains and beans are not typically washed in order to avoid risk of mold. When Monsanto later realized that glyphosate had antimicrobial properties, it patented it as an antibiotic, so the chemical has had a few careers. This is a page from Monsanto's pre-harvest staging guide, which informs farmers about how and when to apply Roundup as a pre-harvest desiccant about a week in advance of harvest. The application dries the plants and makes the harvest more productive for the farmer. So again, now Roundup is used on conventional grain and pulse crops as a desiccant, not just on GM Roundup-ready crops. There are these are the main non-GMO crops that are typically sprayed with glyphosate: wheat, barley, oats, soybeans, dry beans, lentils, peas, canola, and flax. Pre-harvest desiccants are also used on sugarcane, potatoes, mustard, and oilseeds such as canola, flaxseed, safflower, and sunflower. So what might this mean for the consumer? Remember, glyphosate acts as an antibiotic, which can compromise gut microbes and weaken the gut lining. Since the introduction of glyphosate onto the food supply, gluten sensitivity disorders have increased, including irritable bowel syndrome, inflammatory bowel disease, colitis, and Crohn's disease. There's evidence that these gut issues are associated with leaky gut syndrome or increased intestinal permeability syndrome. Leaky gut allows larger molecules to pass through the intestinal lining. The gut lining is meant to act as a barrier to prevent infectious bacteria and other agents from passing into the bloodstream, and this barrier plays an important role in your immune system. If toxins pass through the gut lining, it can trigger an inflammatory response that can manifest as various diseases. There's been ongoing controversy about how much of a role glyphosate has played in gluten intolerance and gut ailments. Even though there are differing conclusions about the effects of glyphosate on the gut, it seems prudent to avoid consuming the chemical by choosing organic grains and beans as much as possible. Many people have turned to a gluten-free diet, as evidenced by the increase in gluten-free sales in the last 10 years. Gluten sensitivities can be mild to serious and may require that gluten be avoided for a period of time to allow healing. But it's unfortunate to eliminate grains from one's diet if a person has not been diagnosed with celiac or not suffering from an inflammatory or an immunological reaction. Grains and beans have been staple foods and main sources of energy and protein for humans for thousands of years. Pulses refer to dried legume seeds, which include beans, peas, and lentils. While some popular diets eliminate these because of their carbohydrate content, these foods provide important nutritional value as a primary source of energy. Nutritionists understand that the three macronutrients, carbohydrates, fats, and proteins, are necessary for good health. Grains and beans are rich in all three. Carbohydrates, however, are the primary fuel source for our bodies, and they're the most efficient at producing energy and burn the cleanest. The energy-carrying molecule ATP metabolizes and wastes only water and CO2. The body preferentially breaks down carbohydrates first as an energy source, and then fats, and finally proteins only if the other two fuels are depleted. Additionally, whole grains and pulses supply the fiber that beneficial gut bacteria need to thrive, and along with water, they're nutritional powerhouses. In addition to concerns about GMOs and synthetic chemicals, applied to grain, seed, and pulse crops, the nutritional value of fruits and vegetables are often compromised by these as well. Choosing organic is the easiest way to ensure our foods provide the most nutritive value, but there are certain conventional fruits and veggies that are safer than others. These symbols on the product labels give us information about the production systems. Because glyphosate is now applied to conventional grain, bean, and dry corn crops, the non-GMO label ends up with little value. The Environmental Working Group, or EWG, provides a number of helpful consumer guides that rate various product contaminants, but their most popular guide is a report on pesticide levels on fruits and vegetables. I believe we have a few of them available if you're interested. Each year, the Environmental Working Group publishes its report on what they call the Clean 15 and Dirty Dozen foods. Their shopper's guide to pesticides in produce, which has been updated each year since 2004, ranks the pesticide contamination of 46 popular fruits and vegetables. That guide is based on test results by the Department of Agriculture and the Food and Drug Administration for around 45,000 samples of produce. It's important to note that the samples are tested for pesticides after they've been prepared to be eaten. This means the produce has been thoroughly washed and peeled if appropriate. And after that, pesticide residues are still detected on many, but probably all the fruits and veggies. The guide makes it easier to distinguish which conventionally grown fruits and vegetables pose a greater risk and which do not. This way, when shopping for produce, you can give priority to buy the organic versions of fruits and veggies that are on the Dirty Dozen list. You can get the list and other Environmental Working Group lists online at their website, ewg.org. The varieties on the 2023, just came out, Dirty Dozen list are strawberries. These are ones to be cautious about. Strawberries, spinach, kale, collards, mustard greens, as well as peaches, pears, nectarines, apples, grapes, peppers, cherries, blueberries, and green beans. This year, these tested with the highest levels of pesticide residues. The conventional produce with the lowest levels of pesticide residues were avocados, sweet corn, pineapples, onions, papayas, sweet peas, asparagus, melons, honeydew, and watermelon, kiwi, cabbage, mushrooms, mangoes, sweet potatoes, and carrots. So those are the conventional fruits and veggies that are generally safest to eat. And of course, organically grown local produce provides maximum nutritional value because they ate healthy diets themselves. So now I'm going to, Cynthia's going to talk about the nutrition rainbow and a few resources and some takeaways from the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Joyce. That was really good. I think I have to do this. There we go. The Nutrition Rainbow, which was created by the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, helps to identify how the color pigments in plant-based foods provide an abundance of cancer-fighting nutrients and plant fibers that help to detoxify the body. So obviously, if we can't have 100% organic food supply, we may have some toxins, pesticides that might accumulate in our bodies. And it's wonderful that fiber helps to detoxify that. The Nutrition Rainbow came as a result of the Physicians Committee's Cancer Project. And as Joyce was discussing, there is implications of with pesticides and also with glyphosate as perhaps being implicated in cancer. So the more colorful your meal is, the more likely it is to have an abundance of cancer-fighting nutrients. Pigments that give fruits and vegetables their bright colors represent a variety of protective compounds. This chart shows the cancer-fighting and immune-boosting power of different hued foods. For instance, in the red foods, such as tomato and tomato products, watermelon and guava, is lycopene, which is also an antioxidant, and it cuts prostate cancer risk. Orange foods such as carrots, yams, sweet potatoes, mangoes, and pumpkins contain a lot of beta carotene, which our body turns into vitamin A, and it also supports our immune system, and it's a very powerful antioxidant. Yellow and orange foods such as oranges, lemons, grapefruits, papayas, and peaches provide a high amount of vitamin C and flavonoids, which inhibit tumor cell growth and detoxify harmful substances. Green foods such as spinach, kale, collards, and other greens, which we hope we can get organic, provide a lot of folate, which helps build healthy cells and genetic material. The green-white category of foods, such as broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, and cauliflower, provide indoles and lutein, which eliminate excess estrogens and carcinogens. The white-green category of garlic, onions, chives, asparagus provide allyl sulfides, which destroy cancer cells, reduce cell division, and support immune systems. Blue foods, such as blueberries, purple, grapes, plums, provide anthocyanins, which are known to destroy free radicals. The red-purple category, including grapes, berries, and plums, provide resveratrol, which may suppress estrogen activity. And the brown food groups, such as whole grains and legumes, provide a fiber which removes carcinogens and keeps us regular. Most grocery stores now have some organic produce and packaged or frozen organic meals. Whole Foods, Fresh Market, Ward's, Trader Joe's, and Publix are some local resources. There are also several local farmers markets here in Gainesville, and many growers offer organically grown foods. You can detoxify your body naturally with plant fiber. There are many kinds of fiber, all found only in the plant kingdom, and they perform many different functions in the body, so you need to eat a wide variety of these whole plant foods to get what you need. For instance, avocados, artichokes, lemons, and arugula help stimulate more bile production for liver cleansing. The herb cilantro binds to heavy metals to help carry them out of your system, and fiber from whole wheat and other whole grains and legumes help keep our bodies regular and help eliminate toxins. Some takeaways from this talk, we hope, is that you realize now that food production methods affect nutritional value. Organically grown foods have fewer contaminants and provide more nourishment. We learned that plant-based whole foods support gut microbes and immune systems by providing beneficial phytochemicals and fiber. Pesticides put our body's endocrine, neurological, and immune system at risk for disease. Agricultural chemicals also contaminate our soil, air, and water, and we can only be as healthy as our soil, air, and water. Glyphosate, also known as Roundup, can compromise our gut microbes and lead to leaky gut syndrome, resulting in many inflammatory disorders. Conventional grains and legumes are treated with glyphosate prior to harvest. We covered the basic USDA organic standards. There are certain conventionally grown crops that test most safe, and your Clean 15 chart shows you these. Choosing organically grown foods whenever you can, and the safest conventionally grown foods, maximizes your nutritional benefits. Here are some resources which, if you would like to look into these matters more completely on your own, are excellent. As mentioned before, the Environmental Working Group, their site is ewg.org. Center for Food Safety, centerforfoodsafety.org. Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, pcrm.org, and nutritionfacts.org. That's a site that's got a lot of a huge archive of blog posts and videos that come up. If you have one particular topic, you plug that into Health Topics and it'll bring up all the videos. They're about 4, 5, 6 minutes long that address your question directly. So thank you all for coming. And are there any questions?
Thank you, Phyllis and Cynthia, and really appreciate your coming out and giving a talk here. Wonderful information.
I assume that most food crops are genetically modified. I mean, we have hybrids that bred certain varieties. What's the difference between standard genetic breeding of crossbreeding and selecting phenotypes to get a certain genotype? What's the difference between that and what we call genetically modified, where it's artificially changed the DNA makeup?
I'm going to let Joyce answer that question. There's a big difference.
Questions that students used to always ask. If you're hybridizing or are crossing within the same species or the same type of plant, that happens kind of naturally. I mean, we help them along, but it's a kind of a natural. Okay, that's more of a natural process. You can do that without splicing their genes. So it's really the splicing. You're taking genes and either manipulating the genes or splicing in genes from other species. So it's quite different than a naturally occurring crossbreeding.
The question was, what is the danger
Well,
of that?
for instance, in the gene splicing, we're talking about if you splice in a wrong place, you can actually create problems with toxins that come forward out of the end product. So that's one of the, yes?
Wait, we're going to go to Zoom here.
Oh, okay.
Keith Berg, go ahead and unmute and ask your question.
Yes, I have a couple of questions. So one was Roundup. I had thought that I had heard that Roundup had been banned a number of years ago, at least for residential use. Is it still being used commercially? I take it is from your talk.
Yes, it is. It is still being used. Yes. And a lot.
So it was only banned for non-commercial use, is that correct?
I think it's all over Lowe's and.
They have
Home Depot.
recently done something to restrict, but I don't remember it. But you can still get the product, and I believe it doesn't even have to be under the name Roundup anymore. You can purchase glyphosate for you. Are you thinking of DDT? Because I know DDT was banned, but actually DDT is still used as an extra ingredient in some pesticides. So DDT does still get used in small quantities, but it was banned as a regular chemical or pesticide on food crops, yes.
Well, I used to use it on my lawn before I knew there was any issue with it. And then I couldn't get it anymore. And I found out that was because it had been banned. So I'm confused about this. And it was specifically Roundup. That a strong memory of that.
I have to check into
I see
that for household use, because I just know that it is still commonly used in food production on food crops. So that's what I'm familiar with.
Okay, second question was apples. I didn't see apple. I'm surprised in your rainbow, apples didn't appear anywhere. Is there a reason they aren't considered to have a color or something?
Well, to answer your question about the nutrition rainbow, these are just a few examples of the different colors of food.
Okay.
Yeah, well, they just picked and chose a few, because otherwise it would be a very long list.
I see. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
I think, Keith, the first place, you shouldn't have a lawn. So we can dispatch your Roundup question in terms of lawns, but I won't go further into that topic.
Okay,
In fact, if you've looked at what's happened here at Okamic, there's a lot of thought about really cutting back severely on the amount of lawn around the campus. But I think you're a little too glib in terms of your descriptions of genetic modification. I mean, I think Bob was right on target. We don't know what current agricultural products that are the results of eons of genetic crossbreeding and selection have in them, unless we sequence the DNA, which is not so easy in a plant. So
Yeah, I think that's a little bit
I don't think it's a simple answer like that. What you know is that it's probably been tried a lot and nothing bad has really been seen, so it's probably okay. But that's all you can really say about natural genetic products. With the GMOs, they can be modified using genes from within the species by moving things around, or they can be modified by introducing a gene from a different species.
another species.
Just in terms of, I don't know what the word is, but anyway, I chaired the Recombinant DNA Advisory Committee when we approved the first frost-free crop to be grown in an open field. And of course, that had a gene that had been put into it to make it more resistant to freezing.
What kind of, was that a cross-species gene? Like a cold water fish, as they did with the
I
flavor
think
saver tomato?
it probably came from a bacteria,
I
but
think they had issues with the flavor saver tomato because of people who had fish allergies, and also with the Starlink corn. Some people had reactions to that. They took that off the market.
yeah. Well, I think that's the point. Things have to be tested. If they're a problem, they're a problem. If they're not, just banning things based on a theoretical or philosophical base is not it doesn't make
I think
total,
there's plenty
total
of studies to
sense
support.
to some of us. And I mean, and it's okay to say you like the natural stuff. But I'm reminded of a story of a woman who took her natural peanut butter and testified in front of a Senate committee and compared it to the commercial peanut butters, which had, I don't know what in them to prevent contamination of various kinds. And they said, can we have a sample of your peanut butter? Which she gave them. And when they tested her peanut butter, which was just made directly from the peanuts, of course, it was loaded with aflatoxins, which is one of the most potent carcinogens that we know. And so, again, I would simply emphasize that you have to look at most things on their face and individually and decide whether or not they're safe. Just have a broad-based fear. I would say the same thing about radiation. Radiation is probably something we could do to many food products that would prevent more cases of food poisoning, of which there are many in this country.
My response would be that
every year.
we're discussing nutritional value, and I think nutritionally people want to be eating fresh foods, not older foods that have not decomposed, that look fresh, but their nutritive value has diminished considerably. So on that point, I would argue, and I would, there are plenty of studies out there that show that there's evidence of toxins being produced from genetically modified or RNAi technology that interferes with the gene expression of natural foods. I mean, but everyone can choose their own diets. Just saying that if you want the most nutritional value from your food, you'd want to eat fresh food that doesn't have pesticides and other
Yeah,
chemicals on it.
the other thing I think you might have mentioned but didn't is the use of antibiotics in food production.
That gets into the animal category.
Yeah.
Yeah, we weren't talking.
I think we have another question. Larry Lowenthal.
I hate to admit it, but Ken raised the same objections I would to your approach. If there's a improper cutting of the genetic material produces a toxic result, well, maybe a perfect cutting of genetic material produces a very beneficial result. And by your approach, we are rejecting those possibilities. I think we have to explore them because they're all tested in the field. And if it's toxic, it's discarded. If it's successful, it's reproduced. But to blanket and to say, don't do this procedure is no different than being anti-vax, in my opinion.
Well, I'm not anti-vax, but I would.
Also, I think if you look at world agriculture and food production in the world, the introduction of these new techniques, farming techniques and introduction of chemicals, pesticides, and genetic engineering has revolutionized the production of crops around the world, and in fact has staved off starvation in countries because of the yield that has increased. So it's been hugely beneficial. Now, in this country, I feel we have the luxury of choosing, do we want organic? Do we want this? Do we want antibiotics? But most people in the world are just lucky to get some food. And they are able to get, more of them are able to get the food because of these new scientific techniques.
I
I'm
agree
not
with
saying,
you.
I'm not
I agree
arguing
with you. We have
yeah.
the luxury to choose.
Yes,
so
we
why
do.
not choose the best?
Yes. So we should be informed and certainly choose what's best for us, but not everybody has that ability or
Okay.
facility to do that.
I use Milorganite liberally when I did gardening, and I realized that that product had killed just about everything in it. So it was pretty good when you put it on your yard or your garden, except that I kept finding all these cherry tomato plants that kept popping up.
The seeds withstand the processing.
They couldn't, they weren't killed by the processing. Do other cities other than Milwaukee use their sewage like that as for fertilizer?
Yes, they don't bag
Into the mic.
they don't bag it up as Milorganite does, but even Scott's has some sewage sludge in it. I wouldn't want to be consuming the chemicals that go down drains, the pharmaceuticals and cleaning chemicals and those kinds of things into my soil, which my plants would uptake. And so that would be of concern to me. So that's why I compost my own food.
Some people
and
still
use it.
do okay with it. I'm in my 90s and I've had plenty of pesticides and things in my body. And I've survived more than 95% of the population.
I think that's a really good point because, this has only been since World War II. So a lot of us grew up with, organic foods. And the younger folks do not. And we have such a high rate of child cancer rates. And I think that, they're coming into a world that has been quite polluted and their food contains a lot of chemicals that disrupt immune system function.
Yeah, and I think the microbiome is really coming out as the most important thing that we have to feed, as you started your talk with, that it's the microbiome we have to feed, not our own bodies. And the microbiome then controls, because cancer, autism, depression, mental health, everything is being linked now to the microbiome. And they like fiber.
And we have to ask, what did our food eat? So,
Yeah.
because the food is what's going to feed our microbiome.
Absolutely,
And
yeah.
that's a connection that's really important that might get lost in the
Yeah,
direction, to be, coming up with all these technologies, genetic engineering technologies.
yeah. Are there any more questions? Are there any online?
Yeah.
The question was, what is the role of yogurt?
Provides probiotics and can help support, provides probiotics that help support your gut microbiome. But I always tell people it's much better to grow your own probiotics than to get them from an external source. But if you read the label on your yogurt containers, make sure they're live probiotics that help your gut microbiome.
Anybody else? If not, thank you so much. This has been something to really think about.
Really good points that everyone
Next
brought.
time we go food shopping, we'll definitely keep it in mind. Thank you so much. Appreciate your talks.